Ladies and gentlemen, take a deep breath for me right here, right now, because what I'm about to talk about, it's not just a story, it's a truth that too many of us had to learn the hard way. You see, there comes a moment after all the gaslighting, after the manipulation, after the smiling mask finally cracks, when you realize you weren't crazy, you were kind, you weren't weak, you were loyal. And in that moment, something divine happens. Justice, quiet, certain, not in the thunder, not in the spotlight, but in time. And yes, you became the proof that God's justice always finds the narcissist. So today, I'm not here to talk about revenge. I'm here to talk about restoration, about how your healing, your growth, your peace became the very justice you were praying for. God's timing exposes what manipulation tries to hide. It's a truth that only reveals itself after the storm has passed, when you're standing there looking back at everything that once confused you, everything that once made you question your own reality. When you're caught in the middle of manipulation, it feels like you're living inside a maze built by someone who knows exactly where every dead end is. They lead you there on purpose, smiling, convincing you that you're safe, that you're loved, that you're the one who doesn't understand. But what they never see coming is time, because time has a way of peeling back masks, of undoing lies that were spoken with confidence. And when you've been wronged by someone who thrives on control, time becomes the stage where God quietly delivers truth. There's a reason we're told to be still. Not weak, not silent out of fear, but still out of wisdom. Because when you're still long enough, the noise of deception begins to separate from the voice of truth. Manipulators are masters of chaos. They depend on your confusion. They depend on your need for clarity so they can rewrite the story in their favor. They twist, they deflect, they project. But here's what they can't control: God's timing. They can lie to people. They can paint themselves as victims. They can wear humility like a costume, but they can't manipulate divine timing. Eventually, every seed of deceit they planted grows into a tree they can't cut down. It's hard to watch injustice happen in real time. You see the narcissist charm others, collect sympathy, twist facts, and for a while it looks like they're winning. They're respected, even admired. You're left with the weight of truth no one wants to hear. You feel unseen, unheard, and sometimes even punished for speaking out. But God's timing doesn't move at the speed of gossip or rumor. It moves at the speed of revelation, slowly, purposefully, perfectly. What manipulation hides in darkness, time brings into the light. And when it does, it doesn't need to announce itself. It simply reveals. God doesn't rush justice because he's not interested in temporary vindication. He's interested in transformation. He waits until the moment when everyone who needs to see the truth is ready to see it. That includes you. Sometimes the delay isn't punishment, it's protection. You weren't meant to watch their downfall while you were still healing. You were meant to be far enough in your growth that when the truth finally came out, you no longer needed to say, "I told you so." You could just breathe and know that God saw everything all along. Manipulation thrives in immediacy. It depends on the short-term illusion. But truth lives in endurance. It doesn't need to hurry because it's confident in its power. That's why the narcissist can't sustain their image forever. The lies they build require constant maintenance, constant performance, constant energy, and eventually even the best actor gets tired. The cracks start small: a contradiction here, a slip of the tongue there, a story that doesn't add up. People begin to notice inconsistencies. Trust starts to fade. The image they worked so hard to construct begins to crumble. Not because anyone exposed them directly, but because time did. There's a spiritual rhythm to this. God lets the narcissist reveal themselves by their own actions. It's not always through dramatic events or public moments. It's often subtle, quiet, and almost poetic. The same charm they used to manipulate begins to repel. The same confidence that once inspired now feels arrogant. The same stories they repeated start to sound rehearsed. It's as if the truth has been hiding inside their words the whole time, waiting for the right moment to echo differently in people's ears. And while all of that unfolds, you're healing. You're learning that your worth was never tied to their validation. You're understanding that being underestimated was actually part of your protection. Because while they were busy performing, you were rebuilding. You were growing in ways they can't. And when God's timing finally brings their manipulation to light, you don't have to do anything. You don't need to defend yourself. You don't need to explain. The truth speaks for itself, and everyone who once doubted you begins to see what you always knew. That's the beauty of divine exposure. It doesn't require vengeance, only patience. When manipulation meets divine timing, there's no escape for the deceiver. Everything hidden eventually surfaces, not out of coincidence, but out of alignment. Every lie finds its limit. Every false story collapses under the weight of truth. And when that happens, you finally understand why it had to take the time it did. You realize that while you were waiting for justice, God was preparing you to receive it without bitterness. Because when the light comes, it doesn't just reveal them, it redeems you. Your peace is the loudest form of justice. There comes a point when words no longer carry the same power they once did, when arguing your truth feels like shouting into a storm that refuses to listen. That's when silence becomes sacred. That's when peace turns from a feeling into a weapon. The narcissist feeds on reaction, anger, tears, frustration, explanations. Every time you respond, they feel significant. Every time you defend yourself, they feel control. But when you choose peace, when you stop explaining and start existing, something inside of them begins to break. Because peace is the one thing they can't manipulate, the one thing they can't take credit for, the one thing that shows the world you no longer live under their shadow. Peace doesn't come overnight. It's not a switch you flip when you decide you're done being hurt. It's a process, slow and intentional, where you start taking your energy back from every argument, every misunderstanding, every story they twisted to make you the villain. You stop trying to fix what was never yours to fix. You stop trying to make sense of what was built on lies. You begin to realize that the most powerful statement you can make is not through confrontation, but through composure. While they scramble to maintain control, you step back into your calm, and that calm begins to expose the truth louder than any accusation ever could. When you find peace, you're not pretending that what happened didn't hurt. You're not excusing the manipulation or minimizing the pain. You're simply saying, you no longer get to live rent-free in my mind. That's the real justice. Because while they're still trying to prove their version of reality, you've already built a new one. One that doesn't revolve around defending yourself or correcting their narrative. You learn that peace doesn't require people to understand you. It requires you to understand yourself. And once you do, their chaos loses its grip. They can't reach you where peace lives. There's something deeply unsettling to a manipulator when their target stops reacting. They'll test it, push it, try to trigger it again, because your silence feels like rejection. Your peace feels like exposure. For the narcissist, control is oxygen, and when you stop feeding that control, they start gasping for air. They begin to show their true selves, not because you called them out, but because they can't survive in a space where they no longer have emotional leverage. That's when people around them start to see what you saw all along. That's when your peace becomes evidence. Peace doesn't always look like stillness. Sometimes it looks like boundaries. Sometimes it looks like saying no without explaining why. Sometimes it looks like walking away when everything in you wants to prove your point. It's not weakness, it's wisdom. It's understanding that arguments with someone who needs to win aren't conversations, they're traps. So you stop participating in the drama and start protecting your serenity. You start valuing quiet mornings, honest friendships, honest conversations with yourself. You start to see that the absence of chaos is not loneliness, it's freedom. There's a shift that happens inside of you when you stop chasing closure from the person who broke you. You realize that closure was never theirs to give. It was yours to create, and that creation happens in peace. You start healing not because they apologized, but because you no longer need them to. You stop needing validation from the very person who tried to destroy your sense of worth. And that kind of peace is the loudest truth of all. It tells the world, I survived you, and I'm better without you. God's justice often comes wrapped in that peace. It's subtle, not dramatic. It's not about seeing them fall. It's about realizing they no longer have the power to make you fall apart. That's the divine part of it. You rise quietly. You rebuild softly. And one day they look at you and see something they can't comprehend. Someone who's at peace despite everything they tried to do. That's when they understand that their control was temporary, but your strength was eternal. Peace doesn't seek revenge. It doesn't need validation. It doesn't need to prove a point. It just is. It becomes the calm that follows the chaos, the proof that the storm didn't destroy you. It shows everyone watching that healing isn't loud. It's steady, consistent, powerful. And in a world where manipulation thrives on attention, your peace becomes the message. It tells your story without words. It shows your growth without explanation. It reminds people that justice doesn't always roar. It often whispers. It's in the way you smile again, the way you rest again, the way you no longer react. That's when you realize that peace didn't just set you free. It revealed the truth in a way that no argument ever could. The narcissist's mask always cracks under truth. No matter how carefully it's crafted, no matter how polished the performance, no lie can hold up against the quiet persistence of reality. At first, the mask seems perfect. It's charming, believable, magnetic. The narcissist knows exactly what to say, how to act, when to smile. They read people like scripts and play whatever role earns them admiration or sympathy. To outsiders, they appear confident, self-assured, even generous. But to those who've seen behind the performance, there's something slightly off. Something that doesn't match the words they speak. It's in the way their empathy feels rehearsed, their apologies sound practiced, their kindness arrives only when an audience is watching. You sense it before you can explain it because the soul recognizes authenticity long before the mind catches up. The thing about truth is, it doesn't rush, it waits. It watches, it collects evidence in silence. And while the narcissist keeps adding layers to their mask, time begins to work against them. They start forgetting the lies they told. Their stories don't line up. Their actions begin to contradict their carefully curated image. The people they once impressed start to notice inconsistencies. Maybe it's a tone that doesn't match the situation, a reaction that seems too dramatic, or a pattern of blame that never changes. Slowly, the illusion begins to weaken. The truth doesn't expose them in one loud explosion. It dismantles them piece by piece. The narcissist's entire existence depends on image. That's their currency, their armor, their sense of control. They wear masks not just to deceive others, but to hide from themselves. Deep down, they know who they are without it. Fragile, fearful, inadequate. The mask gives them safety from that truth, but it also becomes their prison. Because maintaining it requires constant performance, constant validation, constant control. It's exhausting work pretending to be flawless. Eventually, the cracks appear not because someone attacked them, but because the weight of their own pretense becomes too heavy to carry. The pressure of pretending always reveals the truth in time. It might take years before people begin to see what you saw. That's part of the pain. You knew the mask was fake long before others did. You tried to warn them, tried to show them, but your honesty was turned into accusation. They painted you as bitter, dramatic, ungrateful. The narcissist made sure of that because discrediting you was their way of protecting the mask. But truth doesn't need defense. It only needs time. Eventually, the people who once believed the performance begin to notice that the mask never changes, no matter the situation. They start to see how every story makes the narcissist the victim or the hero, but never responsible. They start to question why so many relationships around this person end in chaos. That's when the mask starts to slip, not because you forced it to, but because their own behavior makes it inevitable. The cracking of that mask isn't always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it's quiet, like when their charm suddenly feels manipulative instead of kind, or when their confidence comes across as arrogance instead of strength. The very traits that once drew people in begin to repel them. It's like the illusion runs out of energy. Truth doesn't attack, it simply reveals. And when it does, the narcissist can't hide behind their charisma anymore. Their reactions become exaggerated, their need for control intensifies, their attempts to regain admiration grow desperate. That's when everyone begins to see the person you saw behind closed doors, the one who manipulates, lies, and plays the victim when confronted. The beauty of truth is that it doesn't require an audience to be real. Even if no one sees it right away, even if the narcissist still convinces people for a while longer, truth is working behind the scenes. It shows up in small ways, the inconsistencies in their stories, the emotional exhaustion of those around them, the quiet unease that follows them into every new relationship. The truth shows itself through patterns, through repetition, through the fact that no matter how much they change their mask, the behavior underneath stays the same. Eventually, people connect the dots. They start to remember things that didn't make sense before. They start to recognize that the person they once admired is more illusion than integrity. When the mask finally breaks, it's rarely a single event. It's a gradual unraveling. The lies stop landing. The manipulation stops working. The audience stops clapping. They look around and realize the performance is over, and the silence that follows is deafening. Because the thing the narcissist fears most isn't exposure, it's irrelevance. And that's exactly what happens when the truth stands firm. The world moves on. The people who once adored them begin to see through the performance. The person who once fed their ego no longer reacts. Their power fades, not through revenge, but through revelation. The truth doesn't need to fight. It doesn't need to scream. It just stands there, unwavering, and eventually everything false crumbles around it. The narcissist can't wear the mask forever because truth doesn't tire, but deception always does. The moment the truth surfaces, even subtly, the illusion begins to collapse from within. The cracks spread quietly until the mask no longer fits, until the performance no longer convinces, until the person underneath is forced to face what they've spent their whole life running from. Silence and distance are divine weapons. They are not signs of weakness, but of strength that has learned the difference between reaction and response. There comes a time when speaking your truth to someone who refuses to listen no longer serves healing. It only feeds the chaos. When you've dealt with a narcissist, you learn this the hard way. Every word you say becomes ammunition. Every emotion you show becomes leverage. They twist your sentences, mimic your pain, and use your honesty against you. And when you finally realize that no explanation will ever reach someone who's committed to misunderstanding you, that's when silence becomes sacred. Because silence isn't about giving up. It's about reclaiming control over what no longer deserves your energy. Distance follows silence like peace follows storms. At first, it feels unnatural. You've been conditioned to explain, to defend, to prove your intentions. The narcissist thrives on that. They train you to believe that walking away makes you the problem. They push you to react so they can paint themselves as the calm one. But when you stop engaging, when you pull back your presence, they lose the ability to rewrite the story. Silence robs them of control. Distance starves them of the attention they feed on. And that's where divine justice begins to unfold, not in confrontation, but in separation. Silence and distance are not passive. They are power disguised as stillness. They allow truth to do what time always does: reveal. When you stop arguing, people start noticing who's still creating chaos. When you stop defending yourself, their manipulation becomes louder in your absence. It's like stepping away from a fire that once burned you. You no longer have to prove that it's hot. The flames will show themselves. That's how divine justice works. God doesn't need your anger to act. He needs your surrender, your trust, your decision to step aside so he can move without your interference. The narcissist hates silence because it exposes them. Without your reactions, their mask begins to slip faster. They poke, provoke, and bait you, desperate to make you break your stillness. They'll send mixed messages, use guilt, or play the victim, hoping to drag you back into the cycle. But silence is not absence, it's clarity. It's a quiet declaration that you will no longer participate in your own destruction. Every moment of silence is a message that says, you don't get to decide my peace anymore. And that message is louder than any argument could ever be. Distance is equally divine because it creates space for healing. When you remove yourself from the environment that caused your pain, you give your heart permission to breathe again. You start to hear your own voice instead of their accusations. You begin to see that love was never meant to feel like confusion. You learn to appreciate solitude because it doesn't demand that you shrink. You start remembering who you were before the manipulation, before the gaslighting, before the constant need to prove your worth. That's what distance does. It brings you home to yourself. And in that homecoming, God restores what the narcissist tried to break. There's something holy about choosing silence when every part of you wants to scream your truth. It's an act of faith. It's saying, I don't need to win this battle in front of people. I'll let God win it for me in His time. That doesn't mean you suppress your voice forever. It means you speak when it's safe, when it's wise, when your words will build instead of defend. Because peace doesn't grow in constant explanation. It grows in trust. And when you trust that truth doesn't need your constant protection, you allow divine justice to flow through stillness. The narcissist's power fades in silence because their influence depends on reaction. When you stop reacting, they start to unravel. The same charm that once controlled others begins to sound empty. The same manipulation that once worked begins to fall flat. They're left talking to an echo, and that echo doesn't feed them anymore. They'll try to replace you to prove they've moved on, but you'll notice something. They keep mentioning you indirectly, trying to maintain a connection through attention. That's how you know your silence is working. You've become untouchable. Distance also reveals who stands with truth and who stands with illusion. When you step back, those who are meant to stay will see the situation clearly. Those who are not will align with the performance. That can hurt, but it's necessary because God uses distance not just to protect you from the narcissist, but to separate you from anything or anyone that was built on lies. Silence exposes deception. Distance reveals loyalty. Together, they cleanse your environment in a way confrontation never could. You start to notice the shift inside yourself. The anxiety that once came with silence turns into peace. The guilt that once followed distance turns into gratitude. You stop explaining why you walked away because your peace explains it for you. You stop waiting for closure because distance already gave it to you. Silence and distance don't just end the chapter. They rewrite the story. They transform you from a victim of manipulation into a witness of divine timing. And while the narcissist wonders why their control no longer works, you realize that your silence was never empty. It was sacred, and your distance was never avoidance. It was deliverance. Healing is not revenge, it's redemption. It's the moment you stop letting the pain define you and start allowing it to refine you. When you've been hurt by someone who manipulated your heart, who drained your spirit, who made you question your worth, it's natural to crave justice. You want them to feel the weight of what they did, to understand the damage they caused. But the truth is, healing doesn't come from watching them fall. It comes from watching yourself rise. The desire for revenge burns fast and fades quickly, but healing builds slowly and lasts forever. It doesn't give you the satisfaction of getting even. It gives you something far greater: freedom. The narcissist wants to see you broken because your pain validates their power. Every tear, every angry message, every attempt to expose them only fuels their sense of control. They don't fear confrontation, they fear your peace. They fear the day you stop reacting, the day you stop needing their acknowledgement. That's why healing is such a divine form of justice. It's the one thing they can't undo. When you begin to heal, you step out of the role they assigned you. You stop being the wounded one in their story and start being the survivor in your own. You stop replaying what happened and start rewriting what's next. Healing begins the moment you choose to stop waiting for them to make it right. You realize no apology can fix what was broken, because what was broken wasn't just your trust. It was your belief that they could ever give you the love they pretended to offer. Healing means accepting that closure may never come from them. It comes from you, from the strength it takes to move forward without validation. It's not about forgetting, it's about remembering differently. You look back not with bitterness, but with clarity. You stop asking, "Why me?" and start saying, "Thank God I'm free." At first, healing feels unfair. You're doing all the work while they move on, still smiling, still pretending, still fooling others. But that's the illusion. They may seem unbothered, but narcissists can't escape themselves. They live in a constant state of unrest, chasing the next source of validation, because they can't sit alone with silence. Their peace depends on performance, but yours is growing from authenticity. And that's where redemption begins, not when the world sees their mask fall, but when you stop needing them to. Healing is not punishment, it's proof that they didn't destroy you. Redemption doesn't erase what happened, it transforms it. The same pain that once broke you becomes the foundation of your strength. You start to recognize your resilience in moments you once felt weak. You start to see how every tear watered your growth, how every setback taught you discernment, how every lie taught you truth. Healing gives purpose to your suffering. It reminds you that even betrayal can't stop destiny. It's not about proving them wrong. It's about proving to yourself that you were always worth more than the way they treated you. The beauty of healing is that it's quiet. It doesn't announce itself with fanfare or revenge plots. It shows up in subtle moments. The first time you sleep peacefully again, the first time you laugh without guilt, the first time you feel joy without fear that it will be taken away. It's when you look at their name and feel nothing. It's when you realize you don't need to tell your story to everyone who will listen, because peace has replaced the need for validation. Healing is not a loud victory, it's a gentle resurrection. You begin to understand that forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation. You can forgive someone and still never allow them near you again. Forgiveness is for your spirit, not their comfort. It's releasing the grip that pain had on your heart, not excusing what was done. You forgive not because they deserve peace, but because you do. It's your way of telling God, "I trust you to handle what I can't." And that trust becomes the bridge between hurt and healing. Healing is the most profound act of rebellion against the narcissist because it proves they failed to define you. They wanted to break you into a reflection of their own emptiness, but you became a reflection of grace instead. They wanted you bitter, but you became wise. They wanted you silent in shame, but you became peaceful in strength. Every step toward healing is a step away from their influence. Every moment you choose joy, forgiveness, and growth, you strip them of power they once held over your soul. In the process of healing, you begin to see how redemption isn't just about recovery, it's about transformation. The version of you that emerges from pain is wiser, kinder, more discerning. You start living not to prove anything to anyone, but simply to honor the peace you fought for. You learn to love again, not out of fear, but out of freedom. You learn that God's justice doesn't always look like punishment. It often looks like peace that can't be shaken. And that peace, that strength, that radiant calm you carry now is the real redemption. You became the proof that light never loses to darkness. No matter how deeply you were dragged into manipulation, betrayal, and pain, you still found a way to rise. The darkness tried to convince you that you were powerless, that your voice didn't matter, that your kindness was a weakness to be used against you. It fed on your confusion, on your hope, on your willingness to see the good in someone who hid behind lies. But even in your most broken moments, there was something inside you that refused to die, a quiet, stubborn spark of truth that no amount of cruelty could extinguish. That spark was your light, and no matter how hard the darkness tried, it could never put it out. When you were in the middle of it, it didn't feel like light. It felt like surviving. It felt like trying to breathe underwater, like holding yourself together in a storm that never seemed to end. The narcissist wanted you to believe that the pain was permanent, that they were the only source of validation you'd ever have. They wanted your spirit dimmed because your light exposed their shadow. They needed you to doubt yourself so they could keep control. But every tear you cried, every sleepless night you endured, every time you stood up again when you didn't think you could, you were proving something sacred. You were proving that light doesn't need to fight darkness to win. It just needs to keep shining. Light doesn't compete with darkness, it simply reveals it. That's what your journey became, a revelation. Over time, the lies began to show themselves. The manipulations stopped making sense. The people who once believed the illusion began to see the truth. You didn't have to destroy anyone for that to happen. You just had to keep being you, keep growing, keep walking in truth. Because darkness can only survive where light is absent. And when you chose honesty over fear, peace over revenge, and healing over hate, you brought light into places that once only knew shadows. The narcissist underestimated the strength of quiet resilience. They mistook your empathy for weakness, your forgiveness for submission. But what they couldn't understand is that empathy born from pain becomes discernment, and forgiveness guided by faith becomes freedom. Every time you refused to mirror their bitterness, you were protecting your light. Every time you chose to walk away instead of retaliate, you were keeping your spirit intact. They wanted you to become like them, cold, defensive, numb. But instead, you became something stronger, unshakable. That's what light does. It doesn't just survive, it transforms. There's a different kind of power in surviving darkness without becoming it. It's the kind of strength that doesn't need to prove anything, the kind of confidence that's rooted in grace instead of ego. You start to carry yourself differently, not with pride, but with peace. You realize that you don't have to dim your light to make others comfortable. You don't have to explain your worth to people who refuse to see it. You simply stand whole and healed as living proof that darkness never truly wins. Because even when it looked like it had taken everything from you, it didn't take your essence. It didn't take your goodness. It didn't take your ability to love again. Light always returns, even after the longest night. Sometimes it comes quietly, through laughter that doesn't hurt anymore, through mornings that feel peaceful again, through moments when you look in the mirror and finally recognize yourself. Other times it bursts through suddenly, an opportunity, a realization, a wave of gratitude that makes you understand why it all had to happen. Every part of your healing became a testimony that light never loses. It just waits for the right time to shine again. And when it does, it shines brighter than before because it's been refined by struggle. You became the proof not just for yourself, but for others who are still lost in their own darkness. When they see your strength, your peace, your quiet confidence, they begin to believe that healing is possible for them too. You become a lighthouse, guiding others out of the same kind of storm you once survived. Not by preaching, not by pointing fingers, but simply by being. That's what true light does. It doesn't demand attention, it inspires it. It reminds others that no amount of betrayal, no depth of pain, no lie, no cruelty, no manipulation can destroy the truth of who they are. God uses your survival as a message. You were not just rescued, you were restored for a purpose. The very pain that tried to break you became the platform for your wisdom. The very darkness that tried to silence you became the backdrop that makes your light impossible to ignore. You didn't just survive what happened, you were transformed by it. Your heart became softer but stronger, your mind became sharper but kinder, and your faith became unshakable. You learned that light doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just glows steadily through the cracks until the whole room is filled. That's what makes you the proof. The narcissist's story ended where yours began again. Their darkness may have been loud, but your light outlasted it. It endured, it expanded, and it continues to shine, not because you never fell, but because you kept rising. That's the kind of victory no darkness can erase.